Friends, I am reading from chapter 10, Red and Yellow Roses. When we left off, we had all the excitement with Mr. Martin, and Violet had gone to sleep on the train, and they were riding through towns waiting to arrive in Tennessee. So, chapter 10, Red and Yellow Roses. Do you realize that the child born in 1920 will never know war? Miss Dexter asked. It was morning, and the Suffs were cooking oatmeal over the tiny cook stove at the end of the tourist car, while the car changed trains at Chattanooga. Since the Suffs hadn't ridden the whole car to Nashville, they didn't have to get off and change trains at the junction points. Instead, the car itself was unhitched from one train, rolled into a siding, and hitched up to another train. The Great War that ended in 1918 was mankind's last war, Miss Dexter went on. We have a League of Nations now. More than 20 countries have joined it already. In the future, all difficulties between countries will be arbitrated by an international court of justice. Outside on the platform, a newsboy called, "Extra! Extra! Russians surround Warsaw! Riots in Ireland! English impose martial law!" Does that sound like the end of war to you? Violet wondered why Miss Dexter was able to imagine such a perfect world and not imagine a place for Myrtle in it. She got up and went over to the stove. Miss Kelly was glopping oatmeal into 10 bowls. "Can I have some to take to Myrtle, please?" Violet asked. "Here you go." Miss Kelly handed her a bowl of thick gray oatmeal. Then she reached into a box and heaped a liberal handful of raisins on top. Better give her some extra. Injustice makes a girl hungry. Violet had to get off the train in order to find the car Myrtle was in. They were no longer connected. Everything was being rearranged so new trains could be assembled to head to Nashville and other cities from the junction point here in Chattanooga. She found Myrtle standing on a platform on the other side of the tracks, in a knot of colored people who were waiting to get onto the Jim Crow car to Nashville. Violet hurriedly told Myrtle about what had happened the night before, but there was no time to discuss what might have become of Mr. Martin, because Violet was supposed to get back to the suffragist car before it was moved. "Anyway, I'll see you in Nashville," she said, and hurried away to eat her own breakfast. As she was crossing the tracks, she saw a woman carrying a basket, who stumbled and fell. Violet hurried over to help the woman up. She was tall and angular and bony, and Violet saw with embarrassment in an interesting condition. Violet could feel her face burn. Ladies who were about to have babies, at least as soon as this woman seemed to be about to have a baby, usually stayed home. Violet picked up the lady's basket and also a scrap of black cloth that had fallen on the tracks. "Let me carry this for you," she suggested. "Thank you, child." The woman put her hand on the small of her back and winced painfully. "I'm just going over to the platform to set down." Goodness, that hurt. Doesn't seem to have done any harm to the little one, though. He's still kicking away. Embarrassed by this forthright talk, Violet carried the basket and the cloth across the tracks and up onto the platform. It was a picnic basket, but it looked to her like there were folded clothes in it. The woman sat down painfully on a bench, still holding her back. "Thank you, child. Just put that down right here. That's my son's uniform. They're sending him home from France. He's supposed to be shipped to Chattanooga today." Violet thought that was a funny way of putting it, and then she looked at the piece of black cloth in her hand, and a thought struck her. "Is your son? Did he?" "Yes," said the woman. "Put that on my arm, would you, dear? It's supposed to be my mourning." The war had ended almost 2 years ago, but American soldiers' bodies were still being shipped home from France. It was a slow process, apparently. Violet shook out the black cloth and folded it diagonally, then again to make an armband. She wrapped it around the woman's gray calico sleeve. She could see in the seam that the calico had once been dark blue, but it was faded and worn whisper-thin from many washings. She tied the armband neatly. "Thank you. Ow." The woman winced and put her hand on her belly, and Violet looked at her, worried. The woman's face was drawn and gray, and a strand of gray hair hung damply down from under her straw hat. Violet had never understood the phrase hatchet-faced before, but now she did. The woman looked as though her face had been cut out of a block of wood with a hatchet. It was all sharp, hard angles. "Are you going to be all right?" Violet asked. "I don't know," said the woman. "You know, child, if men knew how much work it is having babies, I'm not sure they'd be quite so willing to start wars and have our babies blow each other up." "My brother was in France too," Violet said, "but he came back," she added apologetically, "with shell shock. He never talks anymore." The gray lady nodded. "I hope the good Lord will grant that this is my last one," she said, resting both hands on her swollen belly, "and that no one dreams up a war to take this one away from me." Violet was just about to repeat what Miss Dexter had said, that the human race had outgrown war, when a barefoot newsboy thrust a newspaper at them and hollered, "Extra! Russians surround Warsaw! Poland under siege! Warsaw to fall by the weekend!" Miss Dexter was wrong, Violet thought, about a lot of things. "If you could vote," Violet said, "then you'd be able to vote against wars." "Vote?" The woman looked as surprised as if Violet had just suggested she tap dance. "My husband would never allow that." Violet was about to answer when a loud clang made her look up, and she saw that the Suffs tourist car was being hitched onto a train. "Excuse me," she cried, "that's my train. Goodbye." She waved and hurried to clamber back aboard before they left without her. I'm going to stop there. I'm on the middle of page 117.